The room erupted in laughter when the Chinese billionaire ridiculed the black waiter, until the waiter responded in fluent Mandarin. "Check out that primate waiting on us," Li Wei sneered in Mandarin, gesturing toward the waiter as if he were a mere ornament. "I'd wager he can't even use chopsticks correctly. People like him belong scrubbing restrooms, not catering to refined folks like us." The chuckles from the table reverberated through the Jade Palace, Manhattan's most elite dining spot. The 5 American businessmen gave awkward laughs, clueless about the words but eager to curry favor with the woman commanding a $60 billion empire. David Thompson kept pouring wine, his expression unreadable, as though her venomous words hadn't touched him. At 32, he'd spent the last 8 months enduring daily slights like these. But tonight, a quiet intensity flickered in his eyes, a dangerous stillness found only in those who've survived fiercer tempests. BILLIONAIRE, head of WAITER Industries and one of Asia's wealthiest women, had come to New York to finalize tech import agreements. Her arrogance was notorious, even among billionaires. She treated Americans like naive children and viewed black people as lesser beings. "That one probably didn't even graduate high school," she continued in Mandarin, relishing each spiteful word. "In America, they think hiring people like him is progress. What a farce." David caught every syllable, every racial jab, every sneer of cultural superiority. What Li Wei didn't realize was that this primate was fluent in Mandarin, held a Harvard Master's in Asian Studies, and had served 5 years as a cultural attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. 8 months ago, David was Dr. David Thompson, a leading authority on Sino-U.S. relations. His life crumbled when he was wrongly accused of leaking diplomatic secrets to China. Though fully cleared, the academic world shut him out. No one wanted to hire someone tainted by an FBI probe, however unjust. "More wine," Li Wei demanded in stilted English, mangling words as if speaking clearly would demean her. David served silently, noting how she avoided his gaze. Why acknowledge the humanity of someone she deemed inferior? As the table openly mocked him, David maintained an eerie calm, like someone guarding a secret too potent to reveal prematurely. Li Wei was about to learn that judging someone by their skin color could be the costliest mistake of her life. If this tale of retribution and justice resonates with you, subscribe to the channel to see how one night of degradation became the priciest lesson a billionaire ever learned. Li Wei reveled in her cruelty, like a spiteful child tormenting a helpless creature. Over the next 40 minutes, she turned the meal into a showcase of racial insults, making even the American businessmen squirm. "This monkey probably expects a fat tip tonight," she scoffed in Mandarin, adjusting her napkin as David brought the appetizers. "In America, they think throwing money at people like him fixes their inferiority. How pathetic." The 5 businessmen chuckled nervously, sensing the malice despite not understanding her words. Robert Hayes, CEO of a major East Coast electronics importer, tried redirecting the conversation, but Li Wei kept targeting David. "You Americans are pitiful," she said, switching between Mandarin and English. "You believe giving these people real jobs equals progress, but look at him, he can barely hold a tray steady." David's hands weren't trembling from fear but from suppressed fury, recalling how, 9 months earlier, he dined with China's ambassador in Washington, negotiating billion-dollar deals. Back then, Li Wei was likely at some Shanghai gala, squandering her inherited fortune. David's fall had been brutal and deliberate. Dr. David Thompson was once America's top expert on Chinese business culture. His dissertation on Sino-American diplomatic protocols was mandatory reading in global universities. At 30, he was orchestrating government negotiations and speaking Mandarin like a native. Then Marcus Sterling, an envious colleague at the State Department, fabricated evidence suggesting David leaked secrets to Beijing. The FBI's 7-month investigation brought public shame, screaming headlines, and abandoned friends. When he was fully exonerated, the forged evidence exposed, it was too late, diplomacy's doors had slammed shut. Marcus Sterling, predictably, claimed the promotion meant for David. "Bring the check," Li Wei snapped in broken English, as if proper speech would lower her to the locals' level. "And tell that girl I'm Li Wei of WAITER Industries. Maybe he's seen my family on TV." David nearly choked. Li Wei of WAITER Industries, the same Li Wei he'd corresponded with for 3 years, arranging trade delegation visits. The same Li Wei who'd publicly lauded his embassy work, calling him the American who truly gets our culture. Of course, she didn't recognize him now. Back then, David wore $3,000 suits and moved in her elite circles. In his waiter's uniform, he was invisible to her, just another black server. "You know what's wrong with Americans," she said in Mandarin, savoring her venom. "You think democracy makes everyone equal. But in reality, there are superior and inferior people. It's just nature. She pointed at David. That one, for instance, probably has kids with 3 different fathers and shares a cramped apartment with 10 others. That's how these people live, in ignorance and debauchery. Robert Hayes grew visibly uneasy. Liwi, maybe we should discuss the contracts. No, she cut him off, waving her jeweled hand. Let me finish my lesson on American society. You need to know who you're dealing with in our business. David served silently, mentally logging every word. Liwi didn't realize she was crafting her own downfall with each insult, each prejudice, each arrogant display. The worst came when she beckoned David closer. You, she said in English, pointing like she was summoning a pet. What's your name? David, David, she repeated, as if the name tasted foul. Ever heard of China, David? Can you find it on a map? The businessman froze. The situation had crossed into unbearable territory, even for hardened deal-makers. Yes, David answered calmly. Liwi cackled. How adorable. He knows where China is. She turned to the table, speaking in Mandarin. I'd bet my fortune this monkey's never left New York. At that moment, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted. David paused writing the order and locked eyes with Liwi for the first time. It wasn't submission or fear, it was something far more dangerous, recognition. Each insult only fueled the quiet strength building within him, a steely resolve forged by the very injustice she wielded. What Liwi couldn't see was that every racial slur was crafting her own defeat, word by word, insult by insult. During the break between dinner and dessert, as Liwi continued her Mandarin insults to amuse the businessman, David slipped into the staff bathroom with a calm that belied the storm within. That monkey probably can't count to 100, she sneered in Mandarin when he was gone. I bet his whole family lives off welfare and food stamps. That's how that inferior race gets by here. Robert Hayes looked queasy. Liwi, this is too much. Too much, she laughed. You Americans are so soft. In China, we know how to keep everyone in their place. That's the difference between a millennia-old civilization and a 200-year-old country. In the bathroom, David pulled out his phone and typed a message that would change everything. The recipient was Dr. James Chun, his former Columbia University mentor, now head of the Center for Asian Studies and a respected Chinese-American figure in New York. James, I need a favor urgently. I'm at Jade Palace in Manhattan and overheard something the Chinese diplomatic community might care about. Liwi of Wei Industries is making extreme racist remarks, thinking no one understands Mandarin. I recorded it all. Can we meet tomorrow? The reply came in under 2 minutes. David, where have you been? Yes, let's meet. Liwi's under investigation in China for corruption and unethical conduct abroad. Her comments could be the key we need. David grinned for the first time in months. Dr. Chun didn't know he was a waiter. David had only identified himself as a witness. His mentor still saw him as the brilliant diplomat he'd been. When David returned, Liwi had escalated her cruelty to a level that made even the toughest businessman uneasy. She spoke in deliberately mangled English, mocking accents she deemed lesser. You know how to clear table good, she said to David, like she was addressing a toddler. Or you only carry plates like trained monkey? The businessman fell silent. Even for those used to cutthroat business, this was intolerable. But none dared challenge a woman controlling billion-dollar deals. I can clear the table perfectly, David replied, his calm stark against her venom. How sweet, she mocked. He speaks properly. Maybe he's not as stupid as he looks. She turned to the businessman. See? Treat these people firmly, and they learn their place. Then Liwi made the fatal error. She pulled out her phone and began recording, narrating in Mandarin, I'm at Manhattan's priciest restaurant, showing how Americans train their black workers. Look how docile he is when I assert authority. David kept serving, but inside, he catalogued every second of her video as evidence. Liwi was documenting her own ruin, creating undeniable proof of her racial and cultural arrogance. In China, she continued, we know each race has its role. Black Americans are suited for manual labor, not leadership or intellect. It's just biology. Robert Hayes stood abruptly. Excuse me, I need to make a call. 2 other businessmen followed, clearly disturbed. Liwi took their exit as approval. See how it works? Establish hierarchy, and even Americans get it, she said, still recording. This waiter knows his place in the world. David finished clearing the table and stood respectfully aside, but his eyes no longer showed deference. An intensity Li Wei was too absorbed in her performance to notice was growing. Over the next 20 minutes, she built a damning case against herself. Claims of Chinese racial superiority, slurs against Black Americans, theories of natural racial hierarchies, and blatant discrimination based on skin color. "You know America's problem," she said in Mandarin, still filming. "You give too many rights to people who should just serve. That waiter probably thinks he deserves our salaries." That's when David decided to act, a choice that would reshape not just his life but potentially global business ties. He discreetly began recording her recording, capturing her words and the cruel glee on her face as she demeaned another human. "People like you," Li Wei said, pointing at David, "should be thankful for any job." She smirked. "In China, we say, a barking dog doesn't bite, but a silent dog doesn't think." David kept his face neutral but was mentally strategizing. Every insult was documented, every prejudice preserved, every arrogant moment saved for the reckoning. He knew exactly which Chinese and American entities would want this evidence. "Tomorrow, I'll post this on social media," Li Wei said in Mandarin, stopping her recording. "My followers in China will love seeing how Americans let these people work in upscale places." David smiled faintly. She was right, someone would find those videos fascinating, but not her social media fans. As she pocketed her phone, smug with her cruel act, David served with the patience of a man who knows justice, like a fine dish, takes time to prepare. Li Wei couldn't imagine that every second of humiliation she inflicted was being weaponized for a battle she didn't know had started. And when it erupted, she'd learned she'd picked the wrong foe, at the wrong time, with the wrong tactics. Li Wei was on her third glass of costly champagne when she decided to cap her cruel spectacle. The few remaining businessmen were visibly uneasy, but she mistook their discomfort for awe at her superiority. "Guess what?" she said in Mandarin, eyeing David. "I'll teach this monkey a lesson in social order." She turned to him and said in broken English, You dance like monkey? I want funny show." That's when David Thompson made the choice that changed everything. He stopped clearing the table, squared his shoulders, and smiled, a smile that made Robert Hayes choke on his wine. "Ms. Li Wei," David said in flawless Mandarin, his diction sharper than hers, "I think you're mistaking this restaurant for a zoo." The silence that engulfed the restaurant was absolute. Li Wei froze, her face draining of color. David's fluent Mandarin hit her like a thunderbolt. "What did you say?" she stammered in English, her bravado vanishing. David continued in polished Mandarin, "I said, it's curious how some equate wealth with wisdom, lineage with integrity, or status with worth." The businessmen were stunned. Robert Hayes, familiar with Chinese interpreters, instantly recognized David's mastery of dialects and nuances only a scholar could possess. "You speak Chinese," Li Wei whispered, barely audible. "Classical Mandarin, modern Mandarin, Cantonese, and 3 regional dialects," David said calmly, switching between English and Mandarin. "Plus English, French, and some Japanese. But you likely noticed that during the last 90 minutes. The truth crashed over Li Wei. 90 minutes. He'd understood every slur, every prejudice, every cruel jab she'd thrown in Mandarin. "That's impossible," she faltered, grasping for control. "You're just a Black American waiter." "I am a waiter," David agreed, his tone steady but firm. "But I'm also Dr. David Thompson, Ph.D. in Asian Studies from Harvard, specializing in Sino-American relations and Chinese business culture." He paused, letting it sink in. "I served 5 years as a cultural attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, coordinated trade delegations, and published 17 academic papers on Chinese diplomatic protocol." Robert Hayes nearly toppled his chair. "My God, you're David Thompson. I read your thesis on Chinese investment in U.S. infrastructure. You vanished from diplomacy a year ago." Li Wei felt the room spin. "Why are you a waiter?" "Because life sometimes teaches humility," David said. "I was falsely accused of espionage by the FBI. By the time I was cleared, diplomacy's doors were shut." He met her gaze. "For 8 months, people like you demeaned me daily, making Mandarin comments, thinking I didn't understand." David pulled out his phone. "Comments about my race, my intelligence, theories on racial hierarchies, and philosophies of superiority by nationality and skin color." Li Wei's face turned ashen. "You wouldn't dare record it." David smiled. "Of course I did. Every insult, every prejudice, every racist video you made about Chinese superiority and Black inferiority." Li Wei's humiliation was total, but David wasn't done. "In fact, Ms. Li Wei, we've crossed paths professionally. I organized 3 senior US investment conferences your company attended. He paused for effect. You joined 2 video calls with me in 2022. Of course, I was in $3,000 suits, speaking as an equal to ambassadors. It's understandable you didn't recognize me serving your table. Liwi tried to speak, but no words came. She'd been exposed and learned the man she'd mocked was someone who'd shaped deals for her company. David pressed on, you claimed people like me don't grasp international politics, but I spent 3 years negotiating US-China trade deals, including some that profited WAITER Industries. The businessmen were in shock, realizing they'd watched a leading expert on Chinese culture be racially degraded by an ignorant billionaire. You also spun theories about race and intelligence, David said, his tone calm but cutting. I wonder what the Chinese Communist Party would think of a Chinese businesswoman preaching racial superiority on US soil. Liwi found her voice. You can't. It could ruin her reputation, her contracts, her family business. David nodded. I imagine so, especially since China frowns on citizens embarrassing the nation abroad. Robert Hayes muttered, Liwi, you insulted one of America's top experts on your culture. David showed Liwi his phone. I've sent the recordings to Dr. James Chun, director of Columbia Center for Asian Studies. He found them compelling. The screen showed Chun's reply, David, this is dynamite. The Chinese consulate needs to see this. Liwi may have sparked a diplomatic crisis. I've also sent it to the US-Chinese Business Association. Their ethics code was strict about members' conduct abroad. Liwi was sweating. Her company relied on global deals, and a racial scandal could cost billions. Please, she whispered, her arrogance gone. I didn't know who you were. Would that excuse your behavior if I were just a waiter? David asked, his question ringing through the silent restaurant. Does dignity depend on degrees or wealth? The manager, who'd been watching, approached. Mr. Thompson, I had no idea of your background. Our policies will change. David nodded. Thank you, but this isn't about me. It's about how we treat those we think are beneath us when we believe there are no consequences. Liwi tried one last plea. Dr. Thompson, perhaps we can negotiate. Negotiate? David gave a sad smile. Ms. Liwi, for 8 months, people like you humiliated me, thinking I was just an uneducated worker. Every insult is documented, every prejudice recorded. He pocketed his phone. All I want is for you to leave knowing you were outwitted by a black American you deemed worthless, and for that lesson to linger forever. Liwi rose, legs shaking, her arrogance replaced by panic. She knew those videos could end her career once they reached the right circles. David remained composed, proving true strength comes from character, not wealth or status. As Liwi fled the restaurant, bearing the weight of her greatest humiliation, one question lingered. Could someone so steeped in prejudice learn anything? Or do some need to learn the hard way that arrogance always has a price? 3 months later, their lives had diverged completely. Liwi awoke to crushing headlines. Billionaire Aries loses $800 million in contracts over racist videos, blared the Wall Street Journal. The Chinese consulate distanced itself from her comments, and WAITER Industries lost 70% of its US contracts in 2 weeks. The family believes you need time to reflect, her uncle said in Mandarin during a tense video call. Your executive rights are suspended indefinitely. The woman who'd arrived in New York as royalty was returning to China a corporate outcast. Meanwhile, David Thompson became a global sensation. The confrontation video went viral, amassing 50 million views, making him a symbol of dignity against prejudice. Universities in 3 countries invited him to speak, and the State Department offered his old job back with a promotion and 60% raise. It wasn't about vengeance, David told CNN. It was about proving human dignity is invaluable and that knowledge can come from unexpected places. He returned to diplomacy but kept 1 day a week at Jade Palace as a senior advisor and minority partner. The restaurant became a beacon for human rights advocates, drawing global visitors to the site where a waiter humbled a billionaire. The incident sparked the David Thompson Protocol, zero-tolerance policies for discrimination in businesses. Liwi's public apology video only worsened her plight. I regret my unfortunate remarks, she said in shaky English. Social media tore her apart, not unfortunate, racist. She's only sorry she got caught. Privilege doesn't buy character. 6 months later, at a corporate diversity conference, David met Robert Hayes again. David, you showed us underestimating people is the biggest business error, Hayes said, shaking his hand with genuine respect. Li Wei, meanwhile, lived in isolation in Shanghai, her arrogance replaced by social exile. Friends shunned her, contracts vanished, and her reputation never recovered. The costliest lesson a billionaire ever learned: money can't buy dignity, and prejudice always exacts its toll. If this story of dignity, resilience, and justice moved you, subscribe and share your thoughts. How would you respond to such a situation? Let's spread the message that respect isn't a privilege, it's a fundamental human right.